So here with me on stage is Juri. Yay. So Juri, you're part of a Nix team, right?
Yeah.
What do you do there?
Right now, I'm mostly responsible for DX, content, like talking to folks like here, we are today here,
So
reach out to
fun
community.
stuff.
Fun stuff, absolutely.
And you wrote on your bio that you write with what?
One wheel. That's kind of my fun side programming activity.
Yeah, I know what's that? How did you got into that? Because you live in the mountains, and I would think one wheel is like a straight,
No, they're really powerful. Like you can go really uphill. And I actually got into it because Kenzie Dots. Who knows Kenzie Dots? Nice. Yeah, he was actually in the Angular community for a long time, AngularJS back in the days. Create some cool libraries. Now he's mostly active in the React space. And he actually showed it to me. I was like, what is this? He's like, that's actually pretty cool. Come over. And I was in the States for a conference. He brought one and I tested it out and I was sold. So since then.
So you're the only one in your region with it.
I live in northern Italy, small villages. So whenever I pass by, people kind of look weird at me. So especially because I also go to fetch pizza at night when it's dark and you see something glowing by. So
that wheel has like a light around when you drive it.
Yeah,
so I saw it once in Antwerp. So
a bit
that's how I
spacey.
know. Yeah, it's super spacey. It's like from the future. But now we're probably it is a bit the future that we're gonna talk about. Are we gonna talk about the future?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, kind of. So let's give a round of applause to Juri and start talking about future.
Okay, perfect. Cool. So I usually like to start these types of talks by asking, how many know about NX? Everyone. How many use NX to ship their... Everyone. All right. It's going to be a fun talk. No, basically what I want to talk a bit today about is kind of like the whole journey that NX tries to help you when you develop software, right? So we heard today, even like when the talk from Igor and Natalia, you barely or rarely start with like nice new greenfield projects, but much more often you are already in existing reality. You need to migrate to something where it hopefully improves your situation, right? So I want to talk a bit through that, how you can consolidate some of these situations and then enhance them and keep them scaling as you keep going. And we're going to touch on monorepos, even though probably many of you know, like you can use NX also outside of monorepos, just to enhance your overall experience with working with software. But monorepos is still like one of the big things, right? And monorepos are great. So I'm contractually obliged to say that at least once for every presentation I make. But seriously speaking, they can help you like reduce communication in larger teams, especially if you start growing, right? If you start small, as you start to keep growing, they can help you reduce that communication overhead when you need to kind of figure out where the other repo is or the other team lives. They can help the whole facility of collaboration and code sharing within it. And they can help you enable shipping faster. That's kind of like the goal, right? If that's not met, then probably it's not the right tool. And as you can hear, like I'm saying, like they maybe help you, right? So there's kind of always a but there when we talk about tooling in general, right? So it's not like something for free. And so usually what I say is like people are stuck in a situation which kind of sucks, right? It's not ideal. It's kind of hard to work with. And so it's like, oh, there's this new shiny toy. Let's go to Monorepo. Let's gonna solve our issues. Let's just jump in, right? And they don't see the pain that potentially might come down the road. They don't see it at least yet. Now, I try to call these like challenges. Pain is such a harsh word. And so this is kind of the things that we want to address, right? So consolidating from this multi-repo setup and coming into a monorepo, how you actually make sure this works in the long term. And this is kind of where NX tries to go with you, right? So it's not just like, oh, hey, we help you kind of speed up really quickly and get up to speed and with a new monorepo, but no, we kind of try to have a solution for you along the way as well. So you don't jump into the whole path from the very beginning because maybe you're in the consolidating phase, but then at some point you might come to the scaling phase where it's actually important to have some tooling support. So as mentioned, I'm currently working at NX already for 5 years and a couple of weeks. It's a long time, incredible. Currently there as the Senior Director of Developer Experience, doing a lot of content, research, like how NX should evolve by talking to you folks, getting a lot of feedback from here. I publish a course on NACAT. I'm also a Google Developer Expert. since quite some years. So let's start with consolidating. That's usually the least fun and most hard part. And it's the second time we now hear incremental, right? Like it was also mentioned in the talk about like web fragments and stuff. There's just no way you can do a big bang migration. You cannot just say, hey, we're gonna stop for 3 months releasing features, if 3 months is even enough, then it will be better, right? It just doesn't work. Like it needs to happen incrementally. And so usually if you have like an ecosystem, like super simplified here, obviously, you have different parts, shared libraries, different technology stacks, maybe even. You share them over like either accessing APIs, if it's like front and back end, or you publish them to local registries. And so as a first step to migrating these, you usually just can move them into a repo, right? Where you move them in. Now you can maybe adjust or enhance already some of the situation where you don't have to rely on external packages anymore and registries, but you directly link it locally. But roughly you leave it in a state as it is, right? You want to do it incrementally, right? So you want to slowly move to this reality. And luckily by now, there's actually good solutions out there, actually baked into the package managers. How many know about npm, PNPM yarn workspaces? Anyone using them already? Mm-hmm. So they allow you basically to define such a workspace's property in package.json, right? Which says basically simply, hey, my packages that are local in this monorepo live in apps and packages, right? And once you have it in there, you can then just have your applications live in those different folders that you specified. And you can have however many you want, those mostly the most common ones. But if you notice here, we have 2 Angular apps, and these are just normal Angular CLI apps, right? They have their own node modules, they have their own Angular JSON, and you manage it in this way. You can share between them, obviously. It is literally kind of like a monorepo locally, right? So you actually reference it in the dependencies as you would share an external library. But there's this asterisk here that just points to a local package, right? So whenever there's an asterisk, and the PNPM or npm workspace looks locally in these folders and picks it up. If you specify a different version, it actually tries to fall back on the public registry. So it would even pull it down from the public registry if it is a public package. It doesn't have to be. And so we wanted to, and this is happening already 2 years ago, roughly, we wanted to be able to also be useful in such a situation, right? So nowadays you can run NX init in an npm workspace, and it will just understand what situation you're in and initialize it for you, right, and enhance your situation. And the main theme for those types of setups is minimalism, right? Because again, we want to migrate, you already have an existing repo. So we basically just install an NX package and a small NX JSON, where you simply define metadata about where things are cacheable, define task pipelines, for instance. But that's kind of it, right? We don't do anything else. And you can now use commands with NX, right? You can use run many, run them in parallel. They're already optimized when they run in parallel based on the dependencies that are there, or based on what failed earlier or not. And you get caching already out of the box, right? So you can already enhance the situation. The biggest advantage is that it will just run your existing scripts. It will not do anything else, right? So if you happen to have a project JSON in there, or an Angular JSON, it will pick those up and run those targets. But if you just have a package JSON, it will just run those as well, right? It doesn't really care about the actual details. And so for an existing monorepo, this is a huge gain, because you can run your existing scripts, so it's minimal changes that you actually need to adopt or change. But you already get things like task pipelines, meaning if there are dependencies between tasks, like if you build an application, it needs to build downstream packages it depends on. And you also get local and remote caching, right? And with that, you're basically good. The thing is, you manage everything there, right? You manage the build tooling, you manage obviously your package JSON scripts that are being invoked, you need to make sure things are being wired up in the dependencies, that they're linked properly. And you also need to kind of handle versions, right? Because now you have 2 Angular applications in there that might have different versions. If you want to share packages, you need to take care of that. Many people in hoist it to have just a single version, but the thing is, like, you take care of this, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Actually, in a migration scenario, you need that flexibility sometimes, right? Where you kind of can tune things and just like have some supporting mechanisms out of that. Now, we always keep asking, like, can we do better in such a situation, right? So we want to still give you that flexibility, but we still also want to support you more. Now, NX plugins is one mechanism where we can kind of help a little more. And people already using NX here, as you've seen before, know how plugins work, right? The main goal there is like they help you pre-configure the tooling, help you kind of configure the caching and everything. You just focus on the actual parts, developing software, right, shipping features, and they take away the burden of the lower-level tooling. So it's kind of like a bit the opposite of what I just mentioned, right, where you manage everything. They can help you. And in fact, this is what a plugin typically looks like. You have here an executor, which is similar to like in Angular, right, where you could just have a package, a function that gets then invoked, and you have options that you pass to it, and it will manage the underlying logic for you. And this is very opinionated, clearly, right, because you have this quite rigid or fixed structure that you need to adapt. For greenfield projects, this is actually really amazing. Like we have a lot of companies that use such an approach and are really productive because you don't even have to know what a Monorepo is about, like how packages are linked, what is going on behind the scenes to some degree, because they manage everything in there. But as you can imagine, migrating from an existing reality, it can be a bit more challenging, right? If you have already an NPM workspace, have already maybe an Angular app, a Playwright app, it can be more challenging to migrate things in. So it's more complicated in that situation. So why is that? Well, clearly you need to migrate your existing setup to something that matches this, right? Maybe then this executor here, in this case for Vite, works a little different, right? So you need to tune for that, you need to adjust for that, and there's work involved, basically. And so we always wonder, like, what if we can kind of combine the two, right? You have the kind of NX init style of thing, and you enhance it with NX plugins. And this is something we keep using, keep referring to, like and even internally, like the thought came up at some point, like what if NX plugins are more like VS Code extensions? Meaning, here, for instance, I have the example of a Playwright extension, right? You clearly can run Playwright tests in VS Code, right? Like you don't have to use the extension. But if you use the extension, it's actually pretty neat, right? You get a test explorer, you get these little icons alongside tasks, you get like just supporting basically, right? So the whole goal is like enhance your experience, but don't necessarily interfere, right? You just remove the Playwright plugin again if you don't like it, right? And you still things keep functioning. So that's kind of like the idea behind. So right now the plugins look something like this, right? You have these options as we've seen, you pass them in, obviously very abstract, high level, clearly. You have some logic going on inside, and then like inside there, this basically direct invokes the dev kit of Angular in this case, or the lower level tooling, and then at the end, some of the output comes out. But the thing happens in this black box almost, right? At least from a developer perspective that uses this tooling. What we move towards is something like this, where we move the actual independence of the Angular CLI a little outside, where we just invoke that CLI, the existing tooling basically that we're using underneath, and we just pre-configure it, because obviously it might need some tuning, like passing in some certain flags or like adjusting current working directory. But then it also reads just from the tooling configuration, in this case, the Angular JSON, right? And at the same time, NX knows obviously the NX Angular plugin, oh, this is an Angular JSON, I understand that. I can infer what tasks you can run for that, right? I know what tasks you can extract out of that. And similarly for Vite, like this is a concept that applies to other technologies as well. Angular is pretty well adopted outside of the Angular, NX is pretty well adopted outside of the Angular community as well. And so we apply the same mechanism to Vite, even to Java and Gradle applications, right? You drop in the plugin, which understands the Gradle config and infers tasks that you can run. And so here, for instance, we see an example of the Angular JSON. So on this side here, you see there's like an NX console screen, which you can also invoke over the terminal. You see it in the web browser. But it shows you basically what the different targets are that NX understands from this file. Luckily, here it understands the build and extract the A8 and N and serve and test, etc. But you can also see it already knows the build is cacheable. If you expand that one, you can see the command that's being run is just ng build. Right? There's nothing magic underneath. It's just ng build being triggered at the end. And NX just takes care of a couple of things beforehand, like caching. And it reads that from the Angular JSON, so it knows where the output is being written. If you change Angular JSON, the plugin will automatically detect. And so you have minimal duplication basically among the two here. And similarly, this is like an example for React app. Now, in this case, I even created the product JSON, which is completely empty. I could even remove that one. It will understand, oh, this is the Vite-based React app. I know how this works. I know how I can run that. I know what is cacheable. And so, again, this is developer ergonomics, right, that we try to improve here. You could remove the plugin, and you could still obviously build your Vite app without any issues. And so it turns out this is actually really, really neat for migrating applications in or importing in general. And so that's why we created NX import, which is a command that actually helps you with that. Now, this is an example here where I have an NX workspace. This is an NPM workspace, actually, where I have an NX installed and I run this NX import to import an existing Angular CLI application. Now, it asks about a bunch of questions, like which branch from that other repo you want to import, which directory if you have multiple ones, where do you want to import it? So in this case, we just say, like, well, into an apps folder. And notice it also analyzed the Git history over there, because it's going to bring the Git history over into your new repo, which sometimes is actually pretty useful. Now it understands, oh, well, this is an Angular app. Do you want me to install an NX plugin for it so it can enhance that workspace? And then it installs it into your current NX workspace. Here you can see the Git history that's being brought over. Now it is like freshly generated Angular CLI app, so this is just initial commit. But you can see over here, over there's the application coming in. It has just an Angular JSON, different parts in here. It has a package JSON with its dependencies. It scripts in here, which you could actually remove at this point. It wouldn't even be strictly necessary. And you have the plugin registered here at the root level, which actually does all this dynamic analysis. So you could remove it here, and it would disable everything inside without actually touching anything. And here again, if you open this screen on the side, you can see how you can run this application, run this build, for instance, which just triggers here the ng build underneath. But then if you run it again, it will cache the output, right? And this is without us doing any sort of config. We just literally import it into our NX workspace, which in this case is an NPM workspace. And so this is what we denote as Project Crystal. So these types of plugins that are more pluggable on top without having to wrap everything and kind of do a whole lot of different things. And so a lot of people actually ask us from the Angular community, but what about Angular, right? Because we heavily promote this, for instance, for React applications, Vue applications, etc. For Angular right now, we only use it for importing, as you have seen right now here, where we bring in Angular applications into an NX workspace, where NX just enhances it a little bit, right? And this is kind of like on purpose, because inside Angular, people are really accustomed to this kind of configuration already, right? How Project.json works. I'd actually like the part that you can split up in a larger monorepo the single Angular JSON file into multiple smaller pieces that still then works as a cohesive entire Angular application, etc. So there's a lot of benefits that you already gain in there. So we talk to a lot of Angular community members and customers that we have. So for now, it's just for the import, but it's going to be extended further as we go forward. Because basically what we want to have with this Crystal plugins is we want to bring these two realities together. So the NPM workspace flexibility versus like the full-blown NX plugins-based workspaces which manage everything for you, but kind of like try to bring the two benefits together so that you become basically more flexibility. So this was kind of the consolidation part. Let's move over to the enhancing part. So from an enhancing point of view, you can basically, you often start with this situation, then it becomes this, then it becomes this, and at some point it just gets out of hand, right? This is typically what happens if you start in a monorepo really naively and just like keep adding stuff, right? And so what you really wanted is something like this actually, right? Where there's at least some structure in there, you have some regions defined, so it gets a little bit more structure. So how? Standardize, obviously, right? So this is how we create libraries, this is where you should put it, this is a subfolder, which in my opinion just works if you automate stuff. Like you can write docs, but we all know developers don't really read docs. So this is usually the way how you automate that in. And you all know, like I don't even have to tell an Angular community like generators, they're awesome. But what I like even more, what we try to make really, really easy to do, and some people yesterday in the workshop have actually kind of worked through some of this, is create your own generators, which could be based on existing ones. But they codify basically your standards that you have within your organization onto your workspace. And it can be really, really handy. And a lot of customers that we work with, actually, this is one of the first things that they start looking into to kind of automate that stuff. Now, once you have a good way to generate stuff, who reviews it, right? Someone needs to look into it. And if you have these regions, there's nothing wrong where some person from another team changes also parts on another project, right? Because maybe you change like a connecting part, and you know how to fix it, so you submit the pull request or something, right? But still, in the end, that team should review those parts because maybe there's other things involved which that our team member doesn't know. So it's important to have ownership defined in a monorepo. So one approach of how you can do that is with code owners. You all know that, GitHub code owners, right? Pretty sure like everyone has kind of looked into that at some point. It's really important to define, but they are file-based, so you have a lot of glob patterns that you need to then map to your structure of the monorepo. And if that changes, you need to adjust the glob patterns again, etc. So we were like, can we do that better, right? Can we improve that situation? And so what we tried to do, or what we implemented recently, is like a configuration which you can define, which is something like this, right? Where you then run a command, which could be automated, and even check on CI, which then generates this automatically, because then X knows, right? So if you kind of look into this situation here, for instance, we install the code owners package into the workspace, and then once you have that installed, you can configure a setup such as in this case, we use a code owners file for GitHub, because there's something different for GitLab as well. You have glob patterns, but the most important part is you can use these tags, which you might already use in an NX workspace to define regions. So you can say scope orders, well, that's the team orders, obviously, right? Scope products, etc. is the team products. As you can see here in the feature create order, this is usually where you define those, also for then checking boundary rules and stuff like that. And then you run the sync command, and what it does is it generates this code owner file, because it knows where the product lives, which file it is. So it just automatically iterates through those and generates the code owner files for the format you want to have, right? In this case, it's GitHub. So this is pretty suitable and useful, especially as you keep changing the moving around folder paths, or which often happens, right? Which you need to do. So that's the enhancing part, and then clearly there's the scaling part. Now these two parts, to be honest, like I had some difficulty dividing them, because they're a bit blurry, right? Because some of the enhancing work that you do also helps with scaling, right? So it's not like a clear cut there. So one thing is like the whole ownership and boundary verification that I already kind of mentioned, but to verify that, right? As you scale, you need to also make sure this is being respected somehow, not just defined once and that's it, and people keep forgetting it. And this is what we try to kind of encompass in the term of conformance, right? Conformance to the rules that you established in your setup. And conformance is, you can define it like this. You have an annex, like a property, where you define rules. And they can be as simple as like importing existing rules that you already have, in this case, the ensure owners. So this verifies that the owners that we defined before are being respected, right? And so you can run this check with like annex conformance, and you see here, for instance, it says, well, that app doesn't have an owner defined, you should probably add one. So this is like a useful thing to add on CI, right? As you keep adding new projects, you might be missing. Similarly, we need to make sure that these boundaries are being respected, right? And many of you might already know the boundary rules that we have, right, the module boundary rules. We try to even elevate them a little further in the sense that they work not just like for JavaScript projects, but they might even work across different technology stacks, right, where you have like your JavaScript frontend, your Node backend, your Java backend, your Go microservice, whatever, right, and you can kind of apply them at a high level across them. But the concept is actually pretty much the same. You have tags that you define, and you define what these tags, kind of how they are related to each other, and whether a connection is actually allowed or is not allowed. And this way you can kind of enforce them. And you can obviously define your own, right? You can just point to a local TypeScript file, implement something like this, like a format like this, where you check and then return a result. And that can then be added to the actual check overall, which then you can run on CI and you will get a report, or with failure CI or PR, and therefore you can actually go and check for that. And finally, there's the whole scaling CI part clearly. Because at some point, Monorepo is healthy, keeps growing, people like it, keep migrating in. And so the number of projects keeps growing, the time will just go up inevitably, right? And so at some point you need to kind of counterbalance that. And right now what we do that is like with NX Cloud. It's kind of like our approach to trying to manage CI in combination with NX. And in NX Cloud we have these different rough overview or points, like big pillars almost, remote caching, distribution, and a bunch more, which you're going to quickly look into. And some of them can actually be layered, right? So you start with just an affected approach, then you add remote caching. It's not enough, you add like distribution, etc. And so they can be stacked on top of it. You don't have like a big jump in, basically. It can start as you grow. So for caching, for instance, it's nothing else than avoiding useless calculations, right? You have all these tasks in front of you. It's almost like a wall that checks, okay, have I seen this already? If I have seen this already, it goes straight through. Otherwise, they have to rerun the tasks, right? And so that obviously computation needs to happen. And if you're lucky, well, you can reduce your build time, save costs on CI because you don't use VMs as long, and you just go through base to the end. And the main consumer there is clearly CI. You can have it locally as well. Some people activate it for the developers. But PRs, like having faster PRs being merged, that's basically what you want to arrive at. Now, sometimes caching is not enough, right? Because sometimes you actually run a situation where the caching basically is just one layer, but then you change some core part, which invalidates the cache for all the different packages that you have. And so again, you run into the worst case. And so the next approach up there is like distributing on CI. So you don't run it on a single machine, but you distribute it on multiple machines, which you can do manually. And I kind of like this picture because like on the left side there, you see a more traditional approach of distribution, right? We have different tables, people sitting around, and you add piles of stuff that needs to be done on these different tables. And so they start working on it, right? But if one table is slow, well, the others are already done, but it's not going to speed up my CI because the slow table is still computing, right? Or if for some reason people just give up on one table to go, that work will stay there, right? It's not going to be done. On this side, on the other hand, it's like you have this table in the middle, you have a pile of things to be done, you just have people around that just pick up stuff as they have more capacity, right? If someone leaves, well, the others will continue, right? So stuff will be done at the end. And this is exactly the model that we kind of follow with NX agents. So here you see a more traditional approach. You have 3 machines, builds and trend that's go on one machine, lints and tests on the others, and distributed like this. But But this has the actual drawback of if one machine dies, things are not going to be completed. And so with NX agents, which is our distribution model that we try to apply, we simply leverage the knowledge that NX has about the different tasks, right? So there's this product graph, all these dependencies. And so what you do is simply saying, I connect this, I allocate 3 agents, and the agents will then go and pick up these tasks as they have availability. If you add a new one, we'll just distribute across 4 agents, right? There's no manual maintenance involved on your end. And there are even no dependencies between them, right? If an end-to-end test needs to build, while the build is happening beforehand, such that an end-to-end test can pick it up. Now, one big problem you have, though, if you look at this, for instance, you see these large blocks here of end-to-end tests. They're really unfortunate, right? You cannot really distribute them even more. And so we looked into what we call atomizer, right? Which cuts things into pieces. So imagine your end-to-end test here at the front, which goes through a grid which cuts it into smaller pieces, and now the agents can pick up these smaller pieces much more efficiently. And so what you end up with, this can be split up, and now we can distribute it better, right? And so we have seen really huge gains with this, like repos going down for like 27 minutes of running end-to-end test down to 9 minutes or something, right? So really huge gains because we can now distribute it across different machines at the same time. And we can also rerun them automatically. If one of these fails, these little tests, we just move it to another machine, retry it again, because tests tend to be flaky sometimes. All right, so how do you enable that? Well, you simply have this line, basically, where you define which machines you use, which type of machine, how many machines, and you can even define, obviously, custom templates, or even dynamically scale it, because sometimes the PR is small, sometimes the PR is huge, right? So you need to kind of adjust for that dynamically. So that said, basically, we try to have a solution for you, basically from local to CI, right, across these different stages that you might be in. We touched on some of them today, not even all of them. Like NX release, for instance, is one example where if you just create a Monorepo for the purpose of releasing packages, well, NX release can help you, for instance, for publishing them to other Monorepos, right, or even just out in the open because it's an open source package. We touched some of the code owners. We didn't touch on NX Migrate, for instance, or on what polygraph is, etc. So that's it. That's kind of like the story we want to cover, and we want to kind of follow you along the whole cycle of your development process. And so, yeah, get in touch. We have quite a huge community, active Discord. Definitely chime in there. And if you have questions, we're always happy to hear them. Thanks.